Why do we get PMS? What is the point of women feeling down, tired, and crampy for half of their cycle and half of their lives? If this is you, stick around. We're going to learn all about the luteal phase, PMS, and what you can do about it. Welcome to the Brave and Curious podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Lora Shahine, a double board certified OBGYN and reproductive endocrinologist. And today I am curious about PMS, premenstrual syndrome, and why we get it and what we can do about it. And today, to teach us all about luteal phase, progesterone, and premenstrual symptoms is Dr. Sarah Hill, a PhD and author who can teach us all about this. Dr. Hill is an award-winning researcher and professor who spent most of her 20-plus year career studying women, relationships, and health. Dr. Hill's groundbreaking research has resulted in both 100-plus research publications and her paradigm-shifting book, This Is Your Brain on Birth Control. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Scientific American, The Economist, and on television shows like Good Morning America. Her latest book, The Period Brain, came out in September of 2025, and it answers the biological mystery in front of us every day. Why do women get PMS? And what can we do to make it better? Welcome to the show, Dr. Hill. I'm so excited to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And is it okay if I call you Sarah, or do you prefer?
No, totally.
Okay,
call me Sarah.
Great. And please call me Lora as well. I just want to be respectful, and I'm so glad. That's wonderful. So I am so excited about your book, The Period Brain. I have been caring for women and hormones and reproductive health for over 20 years. And this is the first time anyone has dedicated an entire book to premenstrual syndrome, the luteal phase. It's so exciting. Oh my gosh. Thank you. And please tell me, why do we get PMS? What is this like? What is the benefit of PMS? Why do we feel like crap half of our lives?
Yeah, so it's like really there are like three things that contribute to the fact that we have PMS, right? One is that as we shift from the follicular phase and ovulation into the luteal phase, our body is transitioning from being optimized for attraction and sex to being optimized for implantation and pregnancy. And women aren't told about the magnitude of changes that go on in the body when you make that transition. And so there's a lot of things that go on that happen kind of, on purpose. Then on top of that, because so many women are not told about what this means and like why it is that we experience some of the changes that we experience during this time, a lot of times we're acting in ways that are counterproductive to what our bodies actually need. And so just to give an example of this, one of the things that our bodies need as we transition into the luteal phase is we need more calories because our basal metabolic rate increases by between 7 and 11% during this time. And so if you're somebody who eats like 2,000 calories a day, this is up, you can need an additional like 200 calories a day. Women aren't told about this. Right. And instead, they're just given one size fits all nutritional guidelines, which say eat this number of calories every day of the week. And then we feel hungry, tired, cranky, and have food cravings, and we wonder why. Right. So another thing that sort of falls into the basket of like why we have PMS is that we're given these one size fits all recommendations for what our bodies need that don't fit in the luteal phase. And then we're acting in ways that are totally counterproductive to what our bodies need. And then our body responds, right? And it responds by not feeling well because it's not being treated well. And then lastly, a lot of the changes that have happened in our environment in the last 100 years, just, the erosion in the quality of our diets and the lack of social support and like the lack of prioritization of creating communities and feeling social support and way too much stress and not getting enough sleep and not getting enough sunlight, and not getting enough movement. All of these things have also eroded at our resilience to hormonal changes that we experience. And the luteal phase is a time of intense hormonal change to a much greater extent than what's seen in the first half of the cycle. The rise and fall of progesterone, it peaks at levels that are 10 times higher than peak levels of estrogen in the first half of the cycle. And so it's like a real adjustment. Our bodies and the cells in our bodies have to be very sort of dexterous and have to be
Yeah.
able to quickly adapt to changing hormone levels during this time, or else it can also make us feel pretty wild and woolly and
Yeah.
not like ourselves. And so many of us, because we don't have, don't get enough sunlight and don't have, so, take time to prioritize our relationships because we're told that our careers, preclude that. And,
Yes.
and we're not eating the right foods and not getting enough sleep and so on. That's also
Yeah.
eroded at our resilience to hormonal changes, which
Yeah.
then exacerbates the experiences that so many women have that are unpleasant in the luteal phase. And so really,
Yeah.
it's a combination of things that are happening on purpose, things that our body is reacting to where we're not giving our body what it needs because nobody told us that any of this matters.
Mm-hmm.
And then lastly, just a lack of resilience to hormonal changes. And all of these things together create this sort of stew of
Yes.
experiences that so many women consider to be like PMS.
Yeah. Oh, well, you just touched on so many things that I want to delve into and learn about and pick apart. And it is great because you could look at this and just say, oh, well, we're just supposed to feel bad for, after we ovulate because we're supposed to be like nurturing, a pregnancy, right? Like that's the whole
Right.
reason that we're here. But you're also touching on things that as we can learn and understand our bodies, we can actually feel better. So there is hope at the end of this
Yes.
episode. So
Yes,
don't
100%.
stop listening. But before we get too far, we've got to make sure listeners understand the menstrual cycle because we've said follicular, we've said estrogen, we've said luteal, we said progesterone. So I mean, and this is something we're not learning in health
Right.
class anymore.
Right.
So please just, let's just learn a little about, just tell us a little bit about the different phases and what's going on.
Yeah, no, totally. So this is just like hormones, and menstrual cycle 101, which, as you noted, I mean, most people aren't taught any of this. Like I didn't know any of this until I was in graduate school. And, a person shouldn't have to get a PhD to know how their body works. And
Yes.
yet that's the environment that we live in. And so just to orient yourself to a cycle, the first day of a person's menstrual cycle is the day they get their period. So that's like
Mm-hmm.
easy to identify.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point in the cycle, hormone levels are at their lowest across the cycle. So levels of women have two primary sex hormones, estrogen and progesterone, and both levels at this point are at their lowest. And when there's low hormone levels in a female body, that tells the brain that it needs to start telling the like the ovaries to start stimulating egg follicles to produce an egg for ovulation. So hormone
Yep.
levels are low. The brain tells the ovaries start stimulating egg follicles because we need to get cracking on, getting ready to ovulate.
Yep.
And egg follicles will start maturing, and as they mature, they lead to the release of estrogen.
Mm-hmm.
And so estrogen is being released. Ultimately, a single egg is chosen. It's like the dominant follicle. It's the chosen one that will be ovulated. It continues to mature. And as it continues to mature, estrogen levels begin to rise pretty rapidly. And then when that egg is ready to be ovulated, estrogen levels are at their highest. And that's sort of indicating when estrogen reaches this like fast peak that it's
Mm-hmm.
time to ovulate. And so then the body will set the signal to ovulate, that egg will be released.
Mm-hmm.
And then that empty egg follicle actually becomes a temporary endocrine structure and it's called the corpus luteum. And it releases progesterone, which is women's other primary sex hormone. And so during the second half of the menstrual cycle, this hormone is released and it rises and peaks about halfway through the luteal phase, which is generally around day 22, 21, 22.
Mm-hmm.
And then at that point, if a pregnancy doesn't take place, then progesterone levels will begin to fall. And then when hormone levels are finished falling, then you start another period and then there's your cycle. So first 14 days are characterized by the rise and sort of spiking of estradiol or estrogen. And
Mm-hmm.
then the second half of the cycle is characterized by the rise and then fall of progesterone.
Yes.
And
Got it.
there it is in a
Perfect.
nutshell.
I know. And it's like, that's like really basic stuff. But I also, didn't really understand it until I got a little bit further in even my medical training, like not a lot of understanding, even kind of in like the general medical training. It was more like when I went into OBGYN and then a fellowship in reproductive endocrinology. So it's like really important to understand those basics. And
Right.
then, so we got follicular phase, dominant hormone is estrogen.
Mhm.
We ovulate. And then we got the luteal phase where the dominant hormone is progesterone. And
Yes.
how do we feel in those two phases with those two different dominant hormones?
Right, right. To answer that question, I think the first thing that we need to do is just kind of orient ourselves to the fact that, like, why do women even have two hormones to begin with? And it's like, because men only have one. And so,
Yeah.
like, why is it necessary for women to have two? And that's going to answer the question about the differences in how we feel. And that is,
Thanks.
for women, the active reproduction requires the body to do two different sets of activities, and they're completely different from one another. The first set of activities is attract a mate and have sex, right? And that is what estrogen is in charge of. It is about sex, it is about attraction, and it's about doing everything that your body can to get an egg in proximity to sperm, right? So women
Mm-hmm.
tend to look more attractive, they feel more attractive, they sound more attractive. It's just all about sex. They're most attractive to men. They find men most attractive. They have more sex. Their sexual desire increases.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of research looking at frequency of sexual activity. It rises with estrogen across the cycle and then falls when estrogen falls. And so that's the first job that our bodies have to do. And the second one is implantation and pregnancy, right? And these are two totally different sets of activities. And
Mm-hmm.
so men only need one primary sex hormone because they only have one job in reproduction, and that's sex,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so they've got this hormone testosterone that promotes sex and what we call mating effort, which is
Mm-hmm.
sex and anything that it takes to get you sex. So
Mm-hmm.
effort directed at doing things that make you attractive to potential mates. And then for women, we need to have two because our bodies have to do that. And that's what estrogen is for, is it helps to orient ourselves to be all about sex and mating. And then we have this other hormone that shifts us into this other state that's optimized for implantation and optimized for pregnancy. And so, the way that we feel is very different across these different cycle phases because our body is orienting itself to solve different goals.
Yeah.
And so the first is this like time of high energy when estrogen is high. This corresponds to a time in the cycle when sex can lead to conception. And
Mm-hmm.
because of this is a time when women tend to, again, feel most attractive. Their energy levels are generally higher. They can really tell the difference between different scents of men. So there's done this really cool research where they looked at sensory thresholds
Mm-hmm.
for your ability to determine differences in levels of testosterone based on scent cues. And when women are at high fertility in the cycle, meaning times in the cycle when sex can lead to conception, that women are more sensitive to these fine-tuned differences, right? They like the faces of masculinized sort of like testosterone cues in male faces. They have higher sexual desire. They feel sexier. They dress sexier.
Mm-hmm.
They
I've
buy
seen.
sexier clothes. I mean, it's really about being oriented towards sex. And then when you shift into the second half of the cycle after sex can no longer lead to conception because ovulation has occurred. The egg is out there, and we'll see if it implants and whether or not it was fertilized. And during that time, the body is gearing all of its resources toward preparing for the possibility of pregnancy. And this is a totally different game, right? This is a time when sex cannot lead to conception.
Mm-hmm.
This is a time when our energetic needs are higher because our metabolism has to crank up because our bodies are working harder to prepare the endometrial layer and everything else for the possibility of pregnancy. So we're hungrier, we're sleepier, we're
Yeah.
more fearful. So, like the threat detectors in our brain become more sensitive to the possibility of potential danger, whether it's emotional danger, like with friends or with romantic partners, where we think that they
Mm-hmm.
might be deserting us. We're sensitive to those kinds of cues. We're
Mm.
sensitive to outside scary cues. And the reason for this is that, we're more vulnerable. It's like as our
Yeah.
body's preparing for pregnancy, that's an incredibly vulnerable state for the female body to be in. And this was particularly true in our evolutionary past when women were completely dependent on their male partners for protection and provisioning. And
Mm-hmm.
so, for most of our history, our female ancestors, if they would not have had their partner around for provisioning and protection, that could be an evolutionary dead end if you're pregnant and then unable to be able to care for or protect yourself and a child.
Mm-hmm.
And so women's threat detectors within the context of their relationship become very attuned to any potential signs of defection, right? Like that
Mm-hmm.
their partner might have another interest or their partner might leave or, and even small subtle cues that didn't bother us in the first 2 weeks of the cycle all of a sudden can seem like a referendum on the relationship, because it's like our brain is primed for fear. And so
Mm-hmm.
there's also these socio-emotional changes that we experience. And all of these are oriented toward allowing ourselves to have a successful pregnancy.
Mm-hmm.
And this is true whether we want to have kids or not. And our body cycles between these two hormones, and it can feel a little crazy if you don't understand what it is that your body is actually trying to do, and physiologically what it's responding to, because we
Yeah.
also experience a number of physical changes within our bodies that then can create differences in how we feel. And like I
Yeah.
said, we get those changes in the threat detectors in our
Mm-hmm.
brain, where they become more sensitive to signs of threat. We have increases in our basal metabolic rate, and so our metabolism is higher and we're hungrier.
Mm-hmm.
Our inflammatory activity in our body changes, and we move from being in a pro-inflammatory state into an anti-inflammatory state, because our body has to allow for the possibility of implantation to occur. And changes in inflammation can also lead to psychological changes, and the list goes on and on and on, and it
Yeah.
can change the way that we experience our bodies.
Yeah.
And when you're not told about the fact that our hormones cycle, and here's how they cycle, and here's why they matter, it can feel like a really crazy time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you're combining what I've learned as far as like hormones and like what happens to the body and all this like medical and sort of science like logic, like this is what's happening, but you're combining it with the why and
Yeah.
the also the evolutionary piece of it, and the symptoms and sort of how we feel. And because I just have really sort of learned it from a Western, medical doctor point of view, but I'm also a woman who's experienced these things. And I never thought to really question why, or kind of say, gosh, why are we talking about this? Like, I think of, the influencers, like there's incredible people on Instagram that are teaching in a different way. The influencers that are like in the first half of my cycle and they're wearing like a red dress and they feel all like excited and happy and wanting to go out. And then it's like, and the second half of my cycle and they're like on a couch, hair up, no makeup, and they're like eating a tub of chocolate ice cream. And I think every woman can understand those feelings. But we have moved to a place in society where we don't embrace that, or want to try to understand the why. It's almost like we're inconvenienced by it, because it does stink. Like it stinks to
Yeah.
not feel like you do in the first half of your cycle the whole time. So we've just sort of wanted to push away from it. And you really are uh rewarded for ignoring those parts of your body and pretending like you're just like a man as far as like career and things like that. I mean, I have so much more to delve into, but there's like a really big picture of this, and then there's the science of it. And I mean, that's why I was just so excited to read your book, because you're pulling a lot of pieces like society and the science and the why and how we feel. And the whole point is to understand more, to appreciate our bodies and what they're doing, not ignore them. And then also, when you understand more, you have a path towards feeling better, not just being upset that, oh, I feel like crap for a week before my period comes.
Right. No, I mean, exactly. And I think that so many of us were led to believe that the only way that we could be successful as women was to pretend to be male and to ignore everything about ourselves as different from men. And I think that for a long time, women have felt a lot of shame surrounding the things about themselves that are different from men. And I think that that's because so many of us have embodied and just sort of accepted as fact that the male way of being is the right way to be, right? And that there's
Yeah.
only one correct way to be in this world, and that way is male. But that just simply isn't true. And I've talked to people over the course of my career, when I'll talk about things like sex differences and women and men having essentially two different evolutionary paths, and because of that we have had we have solved different sets of adaptive challenges, and our brains are optimized for different things in some cases. But there's nothing about the male way of being that is superior, and that we've just we've just accepted that as fact without ever actually sitting and looking at that in the face, and
Mm-hmm.
as a question. and say, is this necessarily true? Because,
Yeah.
and even things like, it's one of the things that's been argued about women is that, oh, well, if you've got changing hormones and if that actually matters for the way that you experience the world, then that means that you're unreliable and, capricious and fickle.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact is, like, no, like we could totally turn that around on its head and say, you only have one primary hormone and you don't cycle between two different states. Like, that's way too simple. Like, how in the world can you possibly make a good decision about anything when you can't
Yeah.
look at it from two different lenses? Like, you're too
Right.
simple. It's just like we just assume that there's something wrong with our way of being because men were studied first. Most of our understanding
Mm-hmm.
about the way that things in the world operate are based on a male ideal because
Mm-hmm.
men were in the workforce first, men were studied first in science. And so
Yes.
there's sort of a male shaped silhouette, in all aspects of life when we think of what normal looks like, whether it's nutritional guidelines or whether it's, legal standards, and all of that has harmed women
Yeah.
because when we try to fit into that male shaped silhouette, it doesn't fit for our bodies.
Yeah.
And the result of it is a lot of us feel like we're broken or that there's something
Mm.
wrong with us. And I think that
Yeah.
one of the consequences of that has been this, has been PMS, and it's been feeling terrible and assuming that it's natural and normal to feel terrible or that it's just part of being a woman to feel terrible for two
Mm-hmm.
weeks out of the cycle or 1 week out of the cycle before your period comes, and that's just not really the case. And
Yeah.
once women have a language with which they can understand what's happening as their body is transitioning from this state that's optimized for sex and
Mm-hmm.
attraction into this state that's optimized for pregnancy, and understand what their brain is doing and what their body is doing, and why it is that they experience changes in physical symptoms if they have a chronic condition, or why they're experiencing psychological changes, or why they're experiencing changes in sexual desire. Once they understand that and understand that it's part of this larger picture of
Mm-hmm.
what it means to be female and that it's very functional, I
Mm-hmm.
think that that's a really important first step. It also allows us to be able to communicate with partners. It
Yes.
allows us to be able to give our bodies what they actually need
Yep.
during this time that's oftentimes ignored,
Yep.
both by science and by medicine and just by women ourselves, right? Where we
Mm-hmm.
just like want to try to pretend like every day is the same day hormonally because it is more convenient, right? To
Yeah.
think about things that way. But then it really can lead us onto a path where it feels a lot more normal. It just
Yeah.
feels more comfortable once we're able to actually understand what our what's happening with ourselves
Yeah.
physically and psychologically, and then being able to nurture and support our resilience to these hormonal changes.
Yep.
So that way it's like we can tell that we're shifting into a different season of our cycle,
Yep.
but it doesn't need to feel like falling off a cliff, right? It
Yeah.
can
I
feel more
love
like you're
that.
coasting down a road than it
Yeah.
does need to feel like you're falling off a cliff.
Right. Embracing it, not feeling shame from it and feeling like you have to ignore it. You can actually make it better if you understand more.
Right, right. If you understand what your body needs, like, so for example, if you give yourself you allow yourself to eat the additional calories that your body needs during the second half of the cycle. If
Yeah.
you understand that and you learn to trust what your body is telling you, and like actually believe it, because I think
Yep.
that women, we're conditioned from the time we're little not to believe our bodies, because we say you're feeling this, we go to the doctor and they say I don't know what that is, and then you
Yeah.
go to the doctor and they're like, well, I don't know what that is either, and then
Mm-hmm.
it's like, well, I'm eating everything that they say I'm supposed to eat and yet I'm still hungry. Well, that's what the nutritional guidelines say. Or if you're a woman in menopause or perimenopause and you're like, I'm eating the same things and I'm gaining weight, and they're
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, well, sorry, you must just not have any self-control, you must be underreporting what you're actually eating. And so I think women, it's like from the time we're small until the time we are buried, we're taught to distrust our bodies and not listen to them, and that
Yeah.
what we're feeling is wrong.
Yeah.
And the fact is that it's just not true. It's just that most of the things that we've been told about what our bodies need, and what it means to be human are very much based on men who
Uh-huh.
don't cycle,
Yep.
who don't have a menopausal transition, and the result of that is that we don't listen to our
Yeah.
bodies, and really learning to believe our body, and embrace what our body is telling us it needs,
Mm-hmm.
and then also just taking steps to increase your resilience to these hormonal changes. And a
Yeah.
lot of that can be done with just lifestyle modifications.
Yeah,
And
and I
it
want to get into that. I really do.
Mhm.
But there's before we do, there's four things that you talk about in your book that really Progesterone plays a role in the luteal phase. So immune system, brain function, temperature changes, and then there's energy and caloric needs that you've talked
Mhm.
about. So how does the progesterone, the dominant hormone in the luteal phase, change those four things?
Right. I mean, it changes, it's shifting gears where, again, we're moving away from being optimized for sex into a state that's optimized for pregnancy. And this does mean different things for different, aspects of our functioning. And so psychologically, as noted, it is a time of increased vulnerability for women because historically, women have been incredibly dependent on men for provisioning and protection. And during this time, women oftentimes feel increased sensitivity to threat, especially with any type of relationship threat.
So this is
And
kind of
this
the progesterone impacting your brain
brain,
function and sort of how you're
yes.
feeling. Okay.
Yeah, and
Okay.
so one of the things that research finds, for example, is that our amygdala, which is the fear center of our brain, actually becomes more functionally connected with a greater number of regions of within the brain than what
Hmm.
it is outside of that cycle phase. And
Yeah.
so it's like it's taking in more information than it does in the follicular phase. And so our
Yeah.
brain is primed for fear and like danger, right? So our smoke detector is literally becoming more sensitive because it's
Well, and
taking in
we're
input
but the only
from
language we have right now is that we're crazy or that our moods are all out of whack.
right,
That, oh,
right,
it must
right,
be, Aunt
right,
Flo is on the way because you're acting
right,
crazy. So
right. I'm
to
acting
have,
crazy.
yeah, to have
Yeah.
the language of like, no, my amygdala is just more sensitive. Thank you very
Right.
much.
Yeah, well, no, it is more sensitive and understanding that it's about the fact that this is transitioning your body into a state of incredible vulnerability.
Yeah.
And throughout most of our history, it was a very bad idea to have a child if you didn't have an investing partner and if you also didn't have social support, right? A social support network, the
Mm-hmm.
village that it
Mm-hmm.
takes to successfully raise a child. And so during this time, when women's bodies are preparing for the transition into the possibility of pregnancy, we become very attuned to threats to any of these important structures that would have impacted the success of childbearing.
Yeah, that
And
makes
so what,
sense.
what we tend to find is that women become more sensitive to social threats in particular. And so anything, going on within the context of a romantic relationship or even with your friends and family where you just become more sensitive to the possibility that, you're unloved and are going to be defected, like
Yeah.
that people are going to
Yeah.
leave you abandoned in this really vulnerable state. And
Wow.
so, and I think that when you understand that your threat detectors do actually get more sensitive during this time, but greater sensitivity doesn't mean greater accuracy. And so, also
Okay.
recognizing that it just means that our brain is tilting on the side of erring on the side of a problem. So
Mm-hmm.
that way you can fix the problem,
Mm-hmm.
because historically that would have been the adaptive thing to do, not because that's going to make us more correct, because it doesn't. It just is
Yeah.
changing which way our errors are falling, right?
Oh.
It's like, we can err on the side of assuming everything is okay and then it's not, which is obviously a big problem.
Mm-hmm.
Or we can err on the side of assuming that everything is terrible. And then if we're wrong in that way, we just look like we're crazy and that we're overly emotional,
Yeah, it
right? And the
reminds me of
cost of
how
that is
you
less.
yeah, it reminds me of how sometimes we're taught to deal with anxiety, like your thoughts are not like truth all the time and like recognizing like, okay, this is your mind, you're thinking these things. And if you can recognize that and kind of do a mind shift, work on mindfulness, it'll help you kind of restore that balance a little bit. It just reminds me of that.
Right. Yeah. And that's exactly, I mean, I think that that's a really powerful tool for dealing with these shifts in the luteal phase, because it
Hmm.
very much is a time where the sensitivity of your smoke detector, like with threat, increases. And so it's like the difference between if any of you have ever had a smoke alarm that goes off every time you make microwave popcorn, right? It
Yeah.
becomes more like that than it
Yeah.
does like the one that only goes off if there's actually a fire. Right. And
Yeah.
it's essentially, it's just our smoke detector, our threat detector is becoming more sensitive because we're in a more vulnerable state.
Yeah.
Right. And the more vulnerable our bodies are, the more anxious we tend to feel,
Yeah.
because our smoke detectors become really primed. And when we're less vulnerable, our smoke detector relaxes a little bit. And
Yeah.
we don't need to take in as much, threat potentially related cues, and we don't feel as anxious. And so understanding that, I think, is a really important, way for women to understand some of the psychological experiences that they
Yeah.
have, and then be able to remind themselves, like, as you said, like feelings are not facts. And this
Yes.
doesn't mean that I'm better at, telling what's happening. It just means that I'm more sensitive. and labeling something. I'm like, my brain is more likely to label something as a threat than what it is 2 weeks ago.
I think
Right.
that's really empowering. And I hope listeners are taking that in. Like, it isn't a weakness to be more sensitive. It's just you can recognize your sensitivity and just be more patient with yourself during the, oh, yeah, I'm in the luteal phase. This is pretty typical for me. It doesn't mean that that feeling is right or wrong, but just that awareness is really powerful. We're going to get back to learning from Dr. Hill in just a second. I want to take a moment to thank you for being here. You are the reason this podcast is here, and it's incredible that we're reaching so many every single week. Make sure wherever you're listening to the podcast, you follow the show so you don't miss a weekly episode, and take a moment to give us a review, comment on what you find valuable, and let us know what you want to hear more about. You can get this audio recording podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts, but you can also watch the video in this interview on my YouTube channel, Dr. Lora Shahine. Now let's get back to learning. What does progesterone do for our immune system? How does our immune system change in the luteal phase?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting because, pregnancy is like an immunological challenge, like of all, like to end all challenges because, when
It's
you have
amazing.
it
I
is
mean,
amazing.
this is what I do every single day is help people
Well, I
help
mean,
people build their families. And it's just absolutely a miracle, like every single day that this works.
it is. No, it is because, your immune system, its job is to search and destroy for things that have different genetic material than the self. And cells
Mm-hmm.
that are rapidly dividing and taking resources from the host organism. And those are two things that embryos do,
Yeah,
So
it's literally, it's like a parasite.
it's
Like,
like a parasite. Yeah, it's like a parasite or a cancer or a
yes.
virus. Like it comes into the body, has different genetic material than self, taps into the bloodstream and starts sucking off resources from mom. And it's got these really rapidly dividing cells. And these are like the hallmarks of all kinds of bad things that the immune system is wired to go after and destroy.
Mhm.
And so to allow for the possibility for implantation to even occur, the body has it has to shift the way that it is handling threats immunologically to allow for the possibility of implantation. And sort of broadly speaking, what this looks like is it looks like shifting from what they call like a Th1 type of an
Mhm.
immune response, which is very pro-inflammatory, and it tends to be more like non-specific immunity, where it's just going after random things that seem like they have characteristics that are related to things that historically have been either pathogens or parasites, toward more of a Th2 type of a response, which is more anti-inflammatory and is a little bit more specific. And
Mhm.
so what we tend to see is that you get this really nice anti-inflammatory effect of progesterone.
Yep.
And it taps the brakes on the immune system in really interesting ways, and ways that can have an impact on people's experiences of different chronic conditions that they have.
Yeah.
So, for example, autoimmune diseases that are the result of an overreaction of the Th2 response, those get worse during the luteal phase, since the
Yes, that
body
makes
is
sense.
shifting toward a Th2 type of an immune response. And those that are influenced by an overreaction of the Th1 response get better, because
Yeah.
that the brakes are being tapped over there. And so you'll oftentimes see changes in symptoms there. Actually, one of the things that I think is most interesting about progesterone in the immune system is this set of ideas that were proposed by some people in the area of like what we would call evolutionary medicine. And so these are people who are studying health and disease with sort of the lens of, the inherited wisdom of our body. Just essentially this idea that here we are, this organism that's been alive for millions of years without nutrition labels and prescription drugs, and just trying to sort of using as a starting point the idea that the body likes to heal itself. And might we listen to some of that wisdom as we're trying to understand the mechanisms of disease?
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, there was this really great article that was published a few years back where it was looking at progesterone and autoimmunity in women. And the hypothesis that was proposed, which I think is so smart and interesting, is that so many more women experience autoimmune disease relative to men,
Yes.
because which we know is true. It's something like between different types of diseases, in some cases like 70% of the disease is the burden is on the shoulders of women and not men. And one of the leading hypotheses for this is the lack of progesterone in most modern women, because throughout most of our evolutionary history, women spent most of their time pregnant. They spent a lot of time pregnant. And then
Whoa.
yeah,
I'm
and
listening. Sorry,
yeah, yeah,
I know where you're going with
yeah,
this, but it's the first
and
time I've heard of it. Okay.
yeah, no, well, it's a really interesting idea. And so it's like we spent a lot of our history, like a lot of our adult lives as
Mm-hmm.
cycling women, pregnant. And so progesterone and pregnancy is a very high progesterone state. And progesterone, again, acts as a powerful brake on our immune system. And so the female immune system has had to evolve in a way that allows it to essentially have a big enough engine to drive with the brake on, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
now you remove the brake, right? And you have this very powerful inflammatory engine that's going without a brake. And that's where you can get autoimmunity. Is it's
Wow.
essentially like you have this incredibly powerful female immune system that has been designed in a way that it's like driving with the brake on, because we've historically had this brake on our immune system for so much of our adult lives that it's required our immune system to be selected to be very powerful, very
Mm-hmm.
inflammatory, because we're driving with the brake on all the time. And then all of a
Totally.
sudden the environment changes and the foot's off the brake.
And we're
And then
not
you
getting
have,
pregnant as much as we
we're
used to.
not,
We're getting pregnant later. And
we're getting,
so we have more
yeah,
time for our immune system to be a little bit out of whack, more time of autoimmune diseases, thyroid disease, rheumatoid arthritis,
right.
endometriosis. Oh
Yes.
my gosh, that is really incredible. I talk to my patients about progesterone every single day because a lot of
Hmm.
times people say, I just know there's something wrong with my immune system. I'm having miscarriages. Like I want to do all the tests. I want to take all the steroids. And I often am saying, listen, you make the best immune modulator in the world. You make progesterone every single month, and it's a wonderful immune modulator. And that's something that we often use, in fertility treatments, and treatments for recurrent miscarriage. And I do talk to my patients about how progesterone shifts our immune system to a Th2 dominant, more
Hmm.
receptive state. And I love, I feel like it's known in the fertility community and fertility treatment. And I love that you're coming at it and learning about it from a totally different lens, and it all kind of comes together. And another reason we don't know a lot about autoimmune issues is absolutely something that you've said several times, is we haven't studied women, in
Right.
medicine. And so there hasn't been a lot of research dollars into it because it's not a male dominate, disease. So we
Right.
got to change that.
Yeah. And what's really nuts about this is that when you look at the preclinical work that's done on autoimmunity, the stuff that's done in animal models is usually done on male models. It's done on
Oh,
male
I think I
animals.
read that in your book too. And I know that from other, gosh, that's
Yeah.
just
No, I mean, it's
wild.
crazy. Or overectomized females.
Right. Well, and the reason is because it's easier, air quotes, you
Hmm.
can't see me on YouTube, air quotes, it's easier to study, you know, male rats, or, are rats that have had their ovaries removed. That's what you mean by overactorized. Is because then it's too hard to figure it out because their hormones are changing. So let's just make the study easier by making the hormones, the
Right.
same.
Assuming that the hormones only matter for
Yes.
reproduction. It's
Yes.
it's based on these like false ideas about what hormones actually do in the body. It's totally
Yeah.
crazy.
Totally
Totally
crazy.
crazy.
All right. So we are changing the world by educating and figuring this out. And now we've got to help the listeners. Okay, I'm the ones who are sitting at home and saying, okay, I understand this. I get this evolutionary wise, but I'm really suffering,
Right.
for the second half of my cycle. So what can we do about it? How can we help?
Right. So the first thing that you need to do is understand whether what you're experiencing is just like a worsening of mood in the luteal phase that is like what I would call like subclinical, or whether you have PMDD. So for
Okay.
women who are severely suffering, right? So when you move into the luteal phase, and for some women, it's the entirety of the luteal phase, so the last 2 weeks of the cycle before you get your period. For some women, it's only the last week before
Okay.
of the cycle before they get their period. But if you are experiencing like extreme changes in mood, um, and 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 especially if you have suicidal ideation
Mm.
during this time because it's so severe, there's a possibility that you have PMDD,
Yeah.
and
And
that's
tell us what that
something.
is. What does that stand for?
It's premenstrual dysphoric disorder,
Okay.
and this is like PMDD, or it's like PMS on steroids.
Yeah.
It's like, it's really sad. I mean,
Really
it's a
amplified.
terrible, yeah, it's a really terrible experience for these women, because it really can, I mean, they feel like their lives are being ruined by their hormones.
Hmm.
And they'll feel normal during the first 2 weeks of their cycle, and then all of a sudden it's just like the floor drops out, and they feel deep depression or deep anxiety, usually a combination of the two things, hopeless, just
Hmm.
despair, oftentimes suicidal ideation. And if this is something that describes you, I then you should make an appointment with your doctor and begin the process of getting yourself a diagnosis, so
Hmm.
that way you can, because the treatment options are a little bit different, right? Because that does require some level of clinical care, and that can either take the form of medication, it can
Hmm.
take the form of cognitive behavioral therapy has actually been found to be pretty
Great.
helpful for women with PMDD. Or there's some research, and we're doing some of this research. I'm looking at stimulation of the vagus nerve,
Mm.
and that playing a role in being therapeutic for women with PMDD. But I would I would make an appointment with your doctor. If you're listening to this and you're like, that sounds like me, make that appointment.
Thank you
And
for
then, yeah,
Yeah, thanks for that
and
clarification. So what I was going to move into is more like lifestyle optimization and things. And you
yes,
are
yeah.
right to make a
So
distinction if this is a
yeah,
clinical yeah,
right. Yes.
yeah,
Yeah. And so, but for women who are just, feeling not their best, where they're like,
yeah,
I can do better than this.
yes.
Like life has to be better than the way that I'm feeling in the last 2 weeks of my cycle. For that, I mean, it's really, it's about optimizing the pillars of health, right? And the pillars of
Hmm.
health are getting enough sleep, right? So taking the steps that you need to get enough sleep, eating a healthy diet, which just means eating minimally processed foods. And the good news about the dietary recommendations, just in terms of improving your resilience to hormonal changes, is that when you look at these different meta analyses of different types of eating, and like what type of healthy eating is the best to improve health and improve resilience to hormonal changes and improve your risk profile for cancer and everything else, what the research all agrees on is that there is no one way to do it right. And
Okay.
what this means is that each one of us can eat according to the way that our body feels the best, as long as we follow some general guidelines, which is, sort of summarized really nicely by Michael Pollan in his beautiful essays about food, where it's just like, eat food, which means actual food, right? Something that your
Yes.
great grandmother would recognize as food. So eat food, mostly plants, not too much.
Yeah.
And that, if that alone, if you just have those as general guidelines, you should be pretty good. And in whatever form that might take for you. Some people like to be totally plant-based, some people like to be Mediterranean, some people like to be keto. And as long as you follow those basic principles, you're going to have, that's going to be supporting your hormones,
Great.
because you're going to be supporting the healthier body. Movement, right?
Hmm.
So of course physical activity is really important. Let me
Sleep.
just yeah,
No, and
sleep,
I'm literally
getting,
hearing myself talk to my fertility patients when they're like, "What can I
yeah,
do to optimize my eggs and my sperm and my, and I'm like, think about your
yes.
overall health. And it's like sleep, nutrition, exercise, and then stress management is my fourth thing.
Yeah, stress management is one, and then I've also got another one, and
Great.
this one is for your fertility patients too, because there's some really cool research on this. Social support. So work on investing in your network. All right.
Oh, I love that.
It is not a character flaw to need community around you.
Hmm.
And work on building that community. And there's been some
Oh,
really neat research showing that women's bodies will release hormones that disrupt ovulation in the follicular phase of the cycle, when they're maturing egg follicles,
hmm.
when they are excluded and feel lonely and don't have social support.
Oh my gosh.
And
But Sarah, I know that this is right, but the hard part is people are often feeling isolated when
right,
they're struggling and then their friends are having their babies or their second babies and they feel like their
right.
life is being lapped by other people and they're not invited to the birthday parties. Like, so thank you so much because yes, I agree. But I just am also seeing like it can feel hard to do that. But
Yeah,
it's like even then when it's more important.
it is. It is. I mean, essentially, and if you look at this through the lens of evolutionary biology, and the fact that we have inherited this like incredibly smart, brilliant brain, And it's so interconnected with our endocrine system and our hormone production. Our body will not ovulate if it does not feel like it's a good idea to be pregnant.
Yeah.
And the things that influence whether it's a good idea to be pregnant, as far as your deep, primal brain is concerned, are, do you have adequate nutritional resources? So are
Mm-hmm.
you eating as at least as much as you're expending? Right? Is your body in good physical health? Right? This means
Mm-hmm.
keeping inflammation low, which again is going to be doing things like eating actual food, right? Making sure that you're getting enough sleep, getting
Mm-hmm.
sunlight, because sunlight can help regulate the immune system. It's also good for vitamin D creation, and it helps to set our circadian rhythms, which gets us to bed on time. And do I have the social support and the
Oh.
stress management to be able to raise a child? And again, this is your
Mm-hmm.
primal brain thinking about this in an ancestral context, because our brain is very old and evolutionary time takes a really long time. And so we've inherited a brain that is optimized for living in small groups where we have, social networks that we rely on for things like childcare and provisioning, right? Our brain doesn't necessarily take in the fact that we could hire a nanny, right? Instead,
Yeah.
it's thinking, do I have the people around me to care for a child, even if that's
Mm-hmm.
unnecessary and not the way that we would do it right now? That's what our brain is looking for.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, I would recommend, if you've got women who are all going through a similar struggle, is they could really benefit from starting a group,
Absolutely.
some sort of a support group, and even just doing mindfulness meditation, where you meditate on the people in your life that you have and
Hmm.
really start to change your mindset. The mindset is incredibly powerful in shifting the physical body. This is how placebo effects work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Placebo effects work because our brain, when it thinks that something is going on, it actually changes what happens physically in the body, right? Placebo effects aren't you just thinking that your strep throat is going away. Your strep throat is actually going away in response to the placebo, because your body changes what it does. The mechanisms change what they do in response to cues from the nervous system. It's a very
Yeah.
smart brain. And
Yeah.
so things that we can do, even if we're somebody who doesn't, like, let's say that we just moved to a new town and we don't really know people that much, is spend some time writing about and meditating on, and not just like sitting and like, oh, meditating on, but writing and changing your mindful, like, what are three pieces of evidence that I have from today that I am loved and supported? What are
Hmm.
three pieces of evidence from this week that I am loved and supported? Right? So just keep building this psychology around reminders of you having the community that you need, and that can change your mindset. And
Yeah.
so I also think that we can do a lot of mindset work that can be really helpful to people in trying to regulate their stress response, but then
Mm-hmm.
also being able to regulate their perceptions of social support in their environment.
Yeah, something that I thought of when you were talking about that, and I really want to look into that research of the power of social support and community to help with fertility, is I have a lot of patients that move here from other countries to work in tech in Seattle, and move from very community-based, village-oriented, large family networks to they're totally isolated in Seattle in an apartment, and their partner is, or they're both working in tech companies like 16 hours a day. And I see the women especially very stressed, not sleeping as well, their periods are off. They get a new diagnosis of PCOS that they never had the symptoms before they moved, and I think their diet changes, their stress levels have changed. And then, but man, that community piece is something that I have not actually thought of. And I am always, giving my patients, resources for connection. There's
Mhm.
resolve.org is a wonderful national organization with online community fertility support networks. And I will put a lot of links in the description of this podcast to help people find it. And thank you so much for sharing that with me, because it's something that you can feel with your gut, but I just hadn't actually said it out loud yet. And I've been counseling about it, but I never did it in a really intentional way, like you just pointed out.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting work. And in fact, so there's been research looking at the role of this in terms of disrupting ovulation.
Mm-hmm.
And like there was a really cool study that was done looking at social isolation during COVID. and it had a terrible effect on cycles. It led to a much greater rate of failure to ovulate than what is found outside of social
No
exclusion.
question. Well,
Yeah,
and
and
then I do know that vaccines can absolutely change, cycles, but it was just
right,
like
it's
then you were
temporary.
also right, but then people are like, "Oh, I got my COVID vaccine and then now I've never cycled the same way
Right.
again." And they're very, and I get it, like temporal association, I get it, but it's like, yeah, there's so many other things that were going on during that time.
Yeah, generally, when you look at immunization related effects, they're the same as illness related effects, and they tend to be very transitory. And so it might mess up a cycle that, like one cycle. But if you're
Yes.
having chronically messed up cycles, then it's probably something else that's
Yeah.
chronic in the environment. And social exclusion, especially when we look at the pandemic related data, a lot
Mhm.
of it seems to be grounded in social exclusion. And like I said, there was this really neat experimental work where they had women being experimentally excluded and then looking at their hormonal responses to that. And they were finding this release of progesterone in the follicular phase
Mhm.
from the adrenal glands, which can just it's a disruptor of ovulation when you get these surges of progesterone in the follicular
Hmm.
phase when the follicles are developing.
That's
And
amazing.
yeah,
Oh,
because yeah, no, it is really interesting, and so we're doing a study right now where we want to actually look at like quality of ovulation, and
mhm.
then also looking at the challenges with conception based on levels of social support within the relationship, and
Mhm.
then also outside of the relationship. And so
Okay.
doing a really intentional study looking at the relationship between that in the trying to conceive
Okay.
population, because
Wonderful.
I think that it is probably the most under appreciated factor that contributes to differences in fertility. That and
Okay.
stress. I mean, it's like we all know we all know that stress is bad for fertility, and like I'm sure you say that to your patients. They're like, oh yeah, stress. But it's like
Yes.
no, but it's like you don't understand. Like it's
Yes.
really bad. It's
Yeah.
like if you're not managing your stress, your brain is just like no way.
Yeah.
Like we
Like,
are not ovulating right
right.
now. Like 'cause
Right.
stress is a sign that you are not able to cope with your environment. And so
Right.
there's no way
Yeah.
that your body is going to be allowing for pregnancy during that time.
Yeah. Amazing.
It's yeah.
I often have patients ask this question, like, I
Hmm.
feel out of whack. I feel, really bad before my period starts. I want to do hormone testing so I can figure
Hmm.
out what's wrong. And then I want you to help me balance my hormones. And it's just like,
Okay.
oh, I know that you have been, the algorithm on whatever social media platform is feeding you all this like hormone balancing stuff. And it's just sort of become this, vocabulary and it's out there. And I try to
Hmm.
explain to my patients, like, hey, I would test you every single day if like a one-time progesterone level or a one-time estrogen level could really tell us what's going on. But I
Hmm.
think we can figure out what's going on by talking to you and listening to your symptoms. And we don't need a blood test to show it. And then
Right.
also the inherent, and then they get frustrated, like, no, I want you to do blood tests. So help me explain to my patients, and then also help explain what this balancing hormone kind of goal is and how we could use different language to help women understand and help them feel better.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so one thing I would say is that what the research finds, like just in terms of if we're talking about mood related changes and some of the other symptoms that women get that they characterize as PMS, that when you look at the hormone levels of women who have PMS and even bad PMS, and you compare it to that of women who do not, there's no differences.
Oh, yeah. I
And
guess
so,
it's just inherent. Like you want someone to show you, like, yes, this is real, right? Because
yeah,
women have been
yeah,
maybe so
yeah,
dismissed, right, for so
right.
long. Thank you for
Yes.
pointing that out, though. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And so that is unlikely if that's what their issues are, that's unlikely to be the problem. The only exception to this is you can get some kind of crazy things happening with mood when you start going into the perimenopausal transition. And a lot of times what you'll get is you get incomplete ovulation. And so you get the egg follicles are being stimulated, and either a dominant follicle doesn't take over, or it takes over and it doesn't quite take, and it doesn't
Yeah.
really go, or it gets released, but it's kind of a weak one, and you get really low progesterone. In
Okay.
those cases you can get like, where you get estrogen levels that are rising in the first half of the cycle, and then they still continue to do their thing in the second half of the cycle, which they also rise and fall, but it's not as like sort of pretty and predictable as it's happening
Mm-hmm.
during a full ovulatory cycle.
Okay.
And then you don't get the release of progesterone. And so progesterone levels tend to be really low. And so sometimes when you get failure to ovulate, you can get hormonal sort of weirdness that you can actually recognize. Like if you use like a take-home fertility monitor, like Mirror
Mm-hmm.
Fertility Monitor or something like that, where you're measuring your hormones every day and then tracking them. This can allow you to be able to see whether you're successfully ovulating.
Yep.
And if you are successfully ovulating, then you probably don't have a hormonal imbalance.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that is sort of one of these things that gets thrown around a lot. I mean, you can get an unbalance in, I guess imbalance is the word, of estrogen and progesterone when you're not ovulating and you're not releasing progesterone, and then you just have estrogen levels and they're kind of going all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
And and that doesn't usually feel good. Like most
Yeah.
women who are experiencing that psychologically feel a little raw, and they can feel
Mm.
angry, and some of these other qualities that you can get when you get unchecked estrogen.
Mm-hmm.
But for women who experience just regular run of the mill sort of PMS, usually the issue isn't the hormone levels. It is their lack of resilience to the changes in hormone levels, because when those hormone levels are changing, it's changing all kinds of things that, not just your hormones, but it's changing neurotransmission in the brain. It's changing the motility of your gut, because our gut
Mm-hmm.
motility slows with progesterone. It's changing the immune system in the ways that we talked about. It's changing your emotional state. And if your body, like, because your body is kind of flipping switches all over the place, if your body is not able to quickly adjust to those by up and down regulating hormone receptors and up and down regulating different neurotransmitter receptors, given the changes in neurotransmission, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera,
Yeah.
it feels kind of bad.
Mm.
And so it's less about what your hormone levels are, and it's more about how sensitive you are to them.
Okay.
And sort of the leading hypothesis that's out there right now in the world, for like trying to understand why some women feel really awful when their hormones are changing like they do in the luteal phase, and then also postpartum, and then also perimenopausally, is
Mm-hmm.
this lack of resilience to the changes, and that essentially their
Okay.
cells aren't able to adjust quick enough
Okay.
to make it comfortable. And so it's really, again, just doing the things to support the pillars of health, including moving your body and sleeping enough and getting some sunlight and eating, food, mostly plants, not too much, social support and stress management. When you do those things and actually take active steps to do those things, it really can lead to incredible improvements in the way that you're feeling across the cycle. And
That's
it can
great.
feel really overwhelming to have to make, especially if somebody's like, I do none of those things. Like, I eat mostly not plants, and I eat too much, and I never move my body, and I stay up too late, and this and that, and it feel overwhelming. And
Yeah.
I have a number of simple steps that you can take. In the book The Period Brain, I go through some of the things that I found were really helpful when I was first getting on the track to
Mm-hmm.
supporting my health, which, I didn't, because I took my body for granted, like I think a lot of us did, until I was in my
Mm.
early 20s. For me, it's like I got to it pretty early.
Mm-hmm.
But before then, I mean, I just, I treated my body like an amusement park,
Yeah.
and took it for
Youth.
granted. And yes, exactly. And then realizing that I had to actually do things to take care of myself. And so I talk about some of the changes I've made that
Yeah.
are just simple, small steps that you can do to just sort of start to get yourself back on track.
Yeah. Give an example of like one or two just like simple things
Yeah,
that someone who's like, oh my gosh, I want to feel better, but I'm
right.
overwhelmed.
Right. So my first one is, and this one's really easy, is that most of us have a cup of coffee in the morning. And we have a little morning routine, like whether it's sitting and scrolling on our phone or whether we do the Wordle or whatever it is, just take that outside. And so
Hmm.
if you do that, you're going to get morning sunlight into your eyes. And by doing that, that's going to help to set your circadian rhythms. It's one of the most powerful
Hmm.
tools that we can use to make ourselves feel sleepy, and also to make, like, at night, and make us feel awake during the day. Because what
Yep.
happens when we get morning sunlight is exposure to that sunlight activates a brain area whose job it is to regulate our circadian rhythms. And so what that does is it actually suppresses melatonin production. So when you go out and get morning sunlight, your brain stops producing melatonin, which is your cue to wake up. So that's also going to wake you up more. But then
Mm-hmm.
it also helps to set the stage for your body knowing when it is that it needs to be getting sleepy. And then so just taking that small step of having your coffee outside, and if you do it in an uncovered space where you're also getting a little bit of sunlight on your skin, you're going to be supporting vitamin D production.
Mm-hmm.
It's also immunomodulatory, so it also will be doing favorable things to your immune system, where it tilts you away from a pro-inflammatory state.
Yeah.
So a little bit of sunlight in the morning, it's like an easy thing. Just take your morning coffee, do it outside, and you've already taken a first step
That's
in
great. I'm glad you
supporting your
didn't
hormonal
say,
health.
sorry, I'm glad you didn't say stop drinking my morning coffee.
Yeah, no,
But yeah,
no,
I
I
love
know.
that. Just take it outside. Take it
Just take it
outside.
outside. All you need to do is
Yeah.
take it outside. And if it's cold outside, just put a hat on, right? Take a
Yeah.
blanket. I have an outside blanket that I
That's
use when it's cold
awesome.
out, and I sit and do that. And for me, what's really cool is that it started with just sitting and having my morning coffee outside. Then it became a coffee walk, where
Hmm.
I laced up my sneakers and took my coffee, and I would just like go for a little walk around the block and get a little bit of movement and see some trees, and which is stress relieving. And then it turned into, now every morning I walk for an hour.
Oh my gosh.
And so
Okay, that's awesome. That's
yeah,
great.
no, but it
But
just like sort of gradually sort of evolved into this, because it
yeah.
just felt so good. Each thing felt so good. And then it was like
Yeah.
one morning I was like, I kind of just feel like taking this on the road. And so I just like
Awesome.
put my shoes on and kind of went for a little walk. And then the walk kept progressively getting longer. And
That's
over a
great.
period of time, it just turned into a morning walk, and
Oh,
still enjoy my coffee.
that's really great. Well, that is such a good tip. Any others that come to mind?
Yeah, so I think that another thing that people get really overwhelmed with is food preparation,
Oh,
because
tell me about
it's,
it.
I mean, yeah, I think it's really overwhelming for people. And I have a system down that I've stuck to for probably, how old is my daughter's 18, so probably 20 years I've stuck to this system.
Yeah.
And so I work like most of us do, right? So I have a job outside the home in addition to having a family. And so for me, it was always really challenging to figure out, because I wanted to eat healthy and I wanted to eat things that tasted good,
Yeah.
but I also am busy.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, there's like
Teach
everybody else
me. I
is.
need help.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me what to do.
So here's what I do, and you can figure out whatever version of this you want, but I always tell people start small. So
Mm-hmm.
like if this is your first time that you've really ever got wrapping your arms around the idea of cooking, pick two recipes. Just find two
Yeah.
recipes, and go online and find something simple, or download a cookbook. Um, uh, just find a cookbook that you like. Find a recipe that
Yeah.
you like. Do not get a recipe with 35 ingredients
Right.
and a bunch
Right.
of
Right.
different steps, because it's
Right.
just going to make you crazy.
Yep.
And in fact, a really good starter one is Martha Stewart has this thing called like Easy Meals or something like that. You just
Okay.
look that up. They have like 6 ingredients, and they're
Done.
so accessible. All
Okay.
right. And it's all like real food, and it tastes really good. And so what you're going to do is you're going to like, and I just do this on Saturday. So I'm going to tell you what I do. On Saturday mornings, I wake up, I have my coffee, and I pull up my cookbooks. I pick a couple of things that I'm going to make that week, and I make my grocery list,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I make my grocery list. I'm going to go buy these things that I need. I also buy vegetables that I'm going to chop up for snacks for the
Mm-hmm.
week.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And so I go shopping on Saturday with my menu planned. And like, if you're just doing this for the first time, like I said, one recipe,
Yeah.
right? So
Make it
buy whatever
easy.
else it is that you usually buy a couple of additional vegetables that you're willing to eat raw as snacks,
Mm-hmm.
just to kind of help feed you throughout the day, and the ingredients that you need for your recipe. Sunday, the next day, find a window of time, whenever it is, and let that be your time, right? You get to put on whatever you want on the stereo or on the
Yeah.
TV
Listen
or
to this
whatever.
podcast, Brave
Listen
and
to this
Curious.
podcast. Exactly. Listen to Brave and Curious, and it is like your time, and you are going to pull out all the produce from your fridge,
Yep.
and you're going to wash it. And I have these big colanders, and I wash it all,
That's great.
and I chop it, and I get everything. Like I get veggies chopped up and put them in glass storage containers in my fridge that I have for snacks during the week. So I've got like carrots and cucumbers and radishes
Yeah.
and bell pepper strips. So those are my sort of
That's great.
go-tos. And so I've got a few of those chopped up in glass storage containers, so I can grab handfuls of them and stick them in a different storage container that I bring to work to snack on when I need a snack. And then I prep whatever it is that needs to go into the recipe for whatever that night. So if like, let's say Tuesday night, I'm going to make XYZ dish. And so
Yeah.
I'll just tell you, I'm making cauliflower tacos tonight, and they're absolutely delicious. They have these like corn tortillas, and you roast the cauliflower with chipotles and adobo, and it's like gets the
Mm.
smokiness, and it's awesome. So I would be prepping. There's a sauce that goes with that. I would prep the sauce for the cauliflower tacos.
Hmm.
I would chop up the vegetables. Like I would chop up the head of cauliflower that I need for that. I
Okay.
put all of that in the refrigerator in storage containers. So when it's time, I'm like, all right, it's Tuesday night. I'm making that recipe. I pull it out. Everything is prepped. I
That's the
just go,
trick.
I cook it, it's done. But it's really just about planning and sticking to it. And it
All right.
really is like I always think of it whenever my husband or my kids come in and I'm like doing my thing and I'm like I am helping out future Sarah.
Yeah.
Like this is me helping future me.
Mm.
And then I'll tell you this. When I go and like get my vegetables or whatever, like making my dinner, I feel so supported by myself. Like I feel like I'm so like past Sarah was so good to me.
Oh, way to go. Pat on the back. I
It's
love
like good for
that.
you, past Sarah.
Yeah.
And it's also, yeah, it's like another way that you can like, it's like self-care, you know,
That's
it's like you're
awesome.
caring for future you. And then you have an
Yeah.
easy meal to throw together on a Tuesday and
Yeah.
I
And
get
you've
to
made it
enjoy
a part of your routine.
my
And you've
routine.
also made it not a chore because it's also like self time. You're listening to
Mhm.
the music that you want or the podcast that you want. It makes it more accessible rather than
Yeah.
this overwhelming.
And if you've got a partner and kids, send your partner and kids out, right? Like this is
Yes.
your time. And especially if you're feeding them, you know, it's like they have a
Yes.
vested interest in you doing this and having this time
Yeah.
be something that's
Quiet.
yours and enjoyable, where you're also not trying to do 15 other things, which women are always having to do. It's just
Yes.
unfortunately the way that our lives are.
Absolutely. And one of the reasons why PMS is worse is because
Yeah.
of the way our everyday life is. That's very true. Will you share that recipe with me, Sarah?
I
And I
would
can
love
put it in
to.
the great.
I would love
I'll
to.
post it. That'll be fun.
I would love to.
Um,
It's yeah, here I'll send it to you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have one last question.
Hmm.
And it really pulls together your previous amazing work with birth control pills, how it works in our brain, and then PMS, because so many women are just told with any symptom that comes along, here, take birth control pills. And I do see that dramatically help people with their symptoms. And so I don't want
Hmm.
to shame anybody for who finds relief with them, but I'm just curious, pros and cons of like this will absolutely level out your hormones because you're getting them from a
Hmm.
pill. But what do you think about the kind of pros and cons of that um, solution?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of these things where some women, especially women with PMDD, where you have these like real severe, mood swings, they can find birth control like incredibly palliative. And they
Yeah.
feel so much better on it than they feel off of it. And so for those women, I say Godspeed.
Yes.
It's
There
I
is a
think
place for it. There can be. I think
yeah, no,
there's,
100%.
yeah.
It's really all about understanding the benefits and trade-off, like the trade-offs that you're making. It's like, what are the benefits and costs
Hmm.
of being on hormonal birth control? And, for a woman with PMDD who's, experiencing these like crippling cycles where they just feel so terrible, this can be a real game changer in terms of
Yeah.
improving their mood and taking the edge off these changes. It'd be really helpful. But there's also a lot of women who are put on it for what are milder symptoms
Hmm.
that probably could be managed with lifestyle related
Hmm.
changes and done in a way that doesn't come with some of the serious and I guess I shouldn't I don't want to say serious because that's always sounds so scary with some of the big trade-offs that women make when they're on hormonal birth control because
Yeah.
the fact is it does change the version of yourself that your brain creates and so it does it can cause changes in mood, it can cause changes in sexual desire and libido, it can cause changes in identity, right?
Yeah.
Just making women feel like they're not quite themselves, and for these reasons, research finds that something like 50% of women when they start hormonal birth control go off it within the first 3 months,
Hmm.
because they just don't like the way that they feel,
Yep.
right? So it does come with some potent changes, that not a lot of women find terribly pleasant. But if you're one of the women who, again, like tolerates those changes well, and it makes you feel better, my impulse is always, like although there's a lot of research that shows us, the ways that hormonal birth control, for example, might influence the way that we feel and experience the world, and that some of these things might be negative. Ultimately, the only data point that matters is you. you
Hmm.
know, like with each one of our lives. And so if you feel better on it, then I think that that's a wonderful thing. And then by all means, you should stay on it, just
Yeah.
understanding what the trade-offs are and
Yeah.
what you should be looking out for. And if you feel better off of it and would prefer to do something else, then I think that that's also valid and worth exploring. And so
Mm.
I think that one of the smartest things that we can do as women is just really educate ourselves about what our sex hormones do for us, and then also educate ourselves about the range of effects that are possible from going on hormonal birth control, and then being able to make decisions about what trade-offs make sense for us at different points in our lives. Because I think for
Yeah.
a lot of us, during certain points of our life, it makes sense to be on hormonal birth control because there's just not a lot of good options for doing anything else.
Yeah.
We don't have a ton of amazing non-hormonal options for contraception for women.
Yeah.
And so many women will find that at some points in their lives, it makes sense to be on the pill or on hormonal birth control. But then at other points in the life, it doesn't make any sense at all. And a
Yeah.
lot of us just were staying on it because of inertia, where it's just
Yes.
like, oh, well, I'll just take this every day, even though I don't need it. And that's what I did for a number of years when I was when I was in college. There was
Hmm.
many times when I didn't need to be on it, and I just stayed on it because I thought it was this healthy thing I was doing,
Hmm.
to keep myself safe and healthy. And I would have made different decisions about those periods of my life now,
Yeah.
because I didn't need it. But for the
Yeah.
periods that I did need it, I'd probably make the same decision to be on it because it allowed me to be able to get my degree and get my PhD and build a successful career because I knew when I was going to have children. And I didn't have
Yeah.
to worry about having them in a time I didn't want to. So,
Yeah. I appreciate your saying that. I just had a phone call with a girlfriend last night who basically is really struggling. I just couldn't believe the timing because I was having this conversation with you, really struggling with premenstrual symptoms. She's been off the birth control pill since she had her second child and been trying acupuncture and supplements and lifestyle optimizations. And she's just absolutely miserable. And she's so scared to try the birth control pill because there's so much, negative information on it. And so I just, I sort of said, listen, I'm your friend. I'm not your doctor, but it sounds like you've really tried everything. You're doing everything that you can. It might be something that you want to try for a little while. And so I'm going to
right.
send her a copy of this episode and have her listen, because hearing that from you with your background in the science and the epidemiology and the evolution, and even, as a woman yourself, taking it and thinking about pros and cons, I just appreciate your balanced approach. This has been such a wonderful conversation. I've learned things. I've thought about things in a different way. And I really do appreciate how I hope that this is empowering to women that are listening to it, to learn about their bodies, not feel shamed by the fact that they feel differently in different times in their cycle, that they've gotten some tips on things that they can do. And I truly want everyone to read this book. Like, I should have read this book, The Period Brain, in medical school. Like, thank you for doing this and doing all of this summary of this really important part of our cycle that has never been highlighted in this specific way before. So thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great chatting with you.
Really appreciate it. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed that discussion with Dr. Sarah Hill as much as I did. I love having a whole episode focusing on the luteal phase and how we can often feel really out of whack as our hormones change, but we can learn about it not only from an evolutionary standpoint, but a metabolic and an immune standpoint, and really understand what's going on with our bodies and how we can help ourselves feel a little bit better. But also, it is really important to talk to your doctor about your symptoms, because there are times where it tips over into a serious clinical diagnosis, and maybe lifestyle optimizations is not going to be everything that you need. I love that she made that point. You can find this episode and all others on my website, Dr. Lora Shahine. Thank you so much for being here. This show is because of you. Be sure and follow wherever you're listening to this podcast. If you want to see the video, see it on my YouTube channel, Dr. Lora Shahine. Thank you to my team at Audiotocracy for another wonderful episode. Look in the description below for links to Sarah's book, and you can find the recipe for that cauliflower tacos on Instagram. All right, you take care. Thank you so much, and until next week, stay brave and curious.